Welcome to English Podcast for Listening and Speaking. This channel will help you improve your English skills. Now, let's get started.
We're the place where we take materials you send us and, well, we dig into them to pull out the really useful stuff. And today, we're tackling something pretty important for a lot of people, IELTS Writing Task 1. We got some great resources shared from IELTS Liz's website.
Yeah, that's right. We're focusing on two blog posts she put up. One looks at a model answer for a bar chart. It's about salt intake, broken down by age and gender from back in 2019 in Europe.
Okay.
And the other one, it's a model answer again, but this time for a table. It shows population figures for people aged 65 plus past numbers and future predictions in Canada, Germany, and the UK.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive really is to get beyond just the basic rules of task 1. We want to understand how to write these reports effectively.
Right, like how to handle those future predictions when they pop up in the data.
Exactly. And fundamentally, what do these specific examples from Liz actually teach us about building a strong response? So where do we start with all this?
Well, I think the best place to begin is with the core features, the absolute must-haves for a good Task 1 report. Liz actually gives some brilliant tips in the comments section of that salt intake chart post.
Oh, yeah, I saw those. One thing that jumped out at me immediately was her point about the introduction. It needs to be super concise, just one sentence, but it has to cover so much ground, like the categories, the divisions, the units, country, time, everything.
It's a tall order for one sentence, isn't it?
Yeah.
But she gives a great example. The bar chart illustrates the amount of salt an average man and woman consumed per day, divided into 9 age groups, in a European country in 2019. Units are measured in milligrams.
See, that just nails it. Everything you need to know to get started right there.
Precisely. And it immediately shows the examiner, look, I can identify the key parameter of this data straight away.
Yeah.
It's a synthesis skill, really.
And then right after that tight intro, you need the overview paragraph. Now, this isn't just repeating the introduction, is it? It feels different.
No, definitely not. It's where you zoom out and point out the main trends, the big picture stuff. Highs, lows, maybe a key comparison.
Okay.
The model overview for the salt chart does this well. It says something like, overall, men had a higher intake of salt compared to women, and salt intake was above the recommended daily amount in most age groups. And it continues with the highest and lowest points, and where the biggest gender difference was.
Ah, so it's like the executive summary of the visual.
Spot on. It shows you've analyzed it, not just started describing the first thing you see. Why do you think that's so important, having it separate like that?
Well, I guess it demonstrates analytical skill. You're not just listing data points, you're interpreting the overall message first.
That's a really key point.
Yeah.
Then, okay, you move into the body paragraphs. And Liz is very clear here. You must use specific data, specific numbers from the chart to support your points.
Right. No vague statements. You can't just say men ate more salt. You need the milligrams.
Exactly. But interestingly, she also suggests a strategy for efficiency. You pick out key points to detail, but that you can refer to other groups more generally.
How does that work in practice?
Well, instead of listing the salt intake for, say, every single age group from 10 up to 30, you might describe the trend. You could say something like, salt intake that increased steadily over the subsequent age groups. See? You cover the trend without getting lost in every single number.
That makes sense. It keeps it focused. I also liked her advice on vocabulary, especially for age groups.
Ah, yes, using varied terms.
Yeah, not just repeating people aged X to Y. She pulls examples from the model like middle-aged people, children aged 5 and under, the youngest age group even by the age of 70 or more. It just sounds better, more flexible.
It does. It shows a better command of English, definitely. But it also allows for more precision, doesn't it? Yeah. Middle-aged conveys something slightly different than just listing the age bracket. It adds a layer of description.
True. And what about word count? People sometimes worry they need to write loads.
Yeah, Liz tackles that head on. She basically says longer doesn't automatically mean better. The length depends on the chart or table itself.
So how much is enough?
She suggests aiming for around 170 to 190 words generally. If the chart is complex, maybe a bit more, like the salt chart model, which was near 200. But she warns against padding it out.
Right. Quality over quantity.
Definitely. And one last small tip she mentioned was about the introductory verb, like illustrates or shows. She advises not to overthink changing it if it's clear and accurate. Focus your energy elsewhere.
Good advice. Okay, so that gives us a solid framework for Task 1 structure and style. Now let's maybe zoom in on that salt consumption data. How did men and women compare across the ages?
Okay, yeah, looking at the model answer for that bar chart, the big picture is pretty clear.
Yeah.
For 2019 in that European country, men generally consumed more salt daily than women. That held true across most of the 9 age groups shown.
And was it generally high consumption?
Yes, that was the other main point. For many groups, both men and women, the average intake was actually above recommended levels.
Right. Can we look at some specifics? What about the youngest kids?
Sure, for children under 5, the boys were just under 2,000 milligrams a day on average. The girls in that same group were lower, around 1,500 milligrams.
Okay, and where did it peak?
The peak consumption was in the 30 to 39 age group. That's where men hit over 5,000 milligrams per day.
Wow, that's high.
It is. Women in that group were also at their peak, nearly 4,000 milligrams. Liz mentions in the notes that the recommended daily amount is around 2,300 milligrams, just to give some context.
So, way over for that age group. Did it stay that high for older adults, say 40-somethings?
It dropped a bit in the 40 to 49 group, but still high. Men were around 4,500 milligrams, women about 3,500, still significantly above that 2,300 recommendation.
It seems like the gap between men and women might have widened later in life, though.
That's a sharp observation, and yes, the data supports it. If you look at the oldest group, those aged 70 or more, the men were still consuming quite a bit, just under 4,000 milligrams.
Okay.
But the women in that same age group, their average was 2,300 milligrams, right on the recommended level. So yeah, the difference between the sexes was much more pronounced in the older age groups.
Huh. Interesting. Any thoughts on why that might be? Different diets, maybe, or physiological changes?
Could be a mix of things, couldn't it? Dietary habits often shift with age, and there might be physiological factors too. It's fascinating how the data reflects these potential real-world demographic patterns.
Absolutely. Okay, so that covers the SALT comparison. Let's pivot now to the other big skill, dealing with future predictions in data. That second model answer Liz provided is key here, the one about the aging population.
Right, the table with data for Canada, Germany, and the UK, showing past figures and projections up to 2030. This brings in a different challenge.
Yeah, because you're often dealing with both past facts and future, forecasts. Liz highlights that you need a mix of tenses.
But crucially, she focuses on the language used specifically for those predictions. Getting that right is vital.
What kind of phrases does she point out?
She gives several good examples. Is predicted to rise, is forecast to continue to remain, is expected that, will increase, and is predicted to reach. Notice the variety there.
Yeah, they're not all the same. Forecast, predicted, expected, subtle differences.
Exactly. And the model answer uses these effectively. The overview mentions the elderly population is predicted to rise overall, and that Germany is forecast to continue to remain the highest. Using both adds a bit of lexical richness.
And in the details for 2030.
We see phrases like, it is expected that the population will increase, and then the specific figures. The percentage is predicted to reach 30.42% in Germany, and so on for Canada and the UK. Again, that mix of expected and predicted.
So the takeaway isn't just use the future tense. It's more about having a toolkit of these specific predictive phrases.
Precisely. It makes your writing more sophisticated, less repetitive, and it clearly signals you understand you're dealing with projections, not certainties. It shows you can handle that nuance in the data.
Got it. Okay, one last area I really wanted to circle back to is that question of writing length and its impact on the score. Because Liz mentions it in both posts, but maybe slightly differently.
Yeah, there's a nuance there, but the core message is consistent. Don't just write more for the sake of it. Longer doesn't mean better. That's her direct quote regarding the SALT chart.
Okay.
That model was around 200 words, she notes, simply because the chart had enough detail that needed covering adequately.
But then, in the feedback for the future prediction task, she gives that general guideline of aiming for around 180 words, usually just under 200. And she cautions that writing much less than 170 might mean you haven't covered enough for a high score.
Right. So putting those together, it seems the key is task achievement. You need to be concise, yes, but you absolutely must cover all the key features and trends presented in the visual.
So if you write too little, say 140 words, you've probably missed something important.
Exactly. You likely haven't developed the point sufficiently. On the flip side, writing, say, 250 words might mean you're including non-essential details or repeating yourself, which isn't good either.
It's about hitting that sweet spot, thorough but focused. The word count is more like a symptom checker than the main goal itself.
That's a great way to put it. Efficient, effective communication of the key information. That's the target.
Okay, great. So wrapping up this deep dive, using Liz's examples has been really helpful. We've seen the need for that clear structure, tight intro, main trends overview, data-packed body paragraphs.
And the importance of language, using varied vocabulary, especially for things like age groups, and deploying those specific phrases for future predictions.
And we've clarified that word count issue aim for sufficient coverage, generally around 170, 190 words, but focus on quality and task achievement, not just length.
I think the big takeaway is that Task 1 really tests your ability to analyze visual data, pull out the significant information, and then communicate it clearly and accurately. It's more than just description, it's analysis and synthesis.
Skills that are useful well beyond just passing IELTS, right?
Absolutely. Which kind of leads us to a final thought for you listening in.
Yeah, think about this. How could that ability to quickly grasp data, identify trends, summarize key points, and even project into the future, how could those skills be valuable in your own field? Or maybe even just in understanding the news or reports you come across every day?
It's about translating numbers and lines into actual understanding, isn't it? Something to consider how the principles from this Task 1 apply more broadly.